Hey,
Hey, how's it going?
good. What's new?
Same old stuff. It's new with you.
Not much. Going out of town, so
It's like fun.
just doing a few things. Heading out of town for a couple days.
I'm sure you can hear me all right and all that.
You can hear
So
me, right? You got me? Am I good?
yeah, yeah, you're kind of low on my end, so I'm turning you up a little bit.
Okay.
Uh,
Fine.
all right. I want to go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Um,
Go ahead.
the first thing that I like to get out of the way. She said this one's a little bit different because this didn't come up in my other debates and the ones that I've seen on here. Is that someone was trying to tell me in some comments, I'm sure you saw them, that this isn't a valid statement because it has to apply to South Africa. But the thing is that it's easy to apply this to South Africa because they're both colonial states where one race is dominant over the other. Um, so it's very easy to make that comparison. But the actual reason that this word is popular with the issue is because that's how it's defined in international law. So that's why we call it apartheid. And and how I kind of got integrated into the issue was in the early 2000s, some people like Noam Chomsky and the newspaper Haaretz, I want to call it, used the term, and it just kind of caught on. But basically,
Yeah. So
because
sorry, I don't mean to cut in, but I know a lot of people have applied the term to Israel. So do you mean that the topic of this argument is not correct? Is people might have claimed that or something?
no, that's what these comments, they're on the last debate you did on this topic with Michael. And yeah, that was just what that person said. So I just kind of wanted to get that out of the way. I know that's not what this debate is about, or really.
I understand a lot of people do apply this to Israel, so it's not like you two are the only people in the world or anything. I mean, if you look it up, the term specifically comes from this, at least as far as I understand, the issue in South Africa between 1930. 1930. I was just looking it up, but 1930 something to 1994, I believe it was. So, anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but basically, so I'm just going to go ahead and break this into, since there's 4 parts to why this is illegal under international law, which first I should probably mention the laws that it breaks. That's what I'm looking for here, because there's obviously a lot of history and a lot of law here. But so the laws, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the Charter of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 2 of the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid, thereafter the Apartheid Convention, and the Rome Statute. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a chance to talk here, but real soon. But basically, this argument for the term apartheid is how it's applied under the statute under international law. Can you hear me okay? I hear an echo.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? I just plugged in some headphones.
Yeah, I hear you fine. It's just that echo. So basically, there's 4 domains. The first domain is civil law, which is the citizens who live inside the proper borders of Israel. And I drew this map. So they would be the citizens in this area, and then the second area would be Jerusalem, which is a little bit different because the citizens on the east side of the city are the Palestinian cities. That they are, the separation wall blocks them into the West Bank, even though that's Israel's territory, so they can't enter Israel West Bank that are trapped there. The second are the citizens who live in the Palestinian territories. So they have the citizens in Gaza and West Bank, and they live under military occupation. And the fourth is that the right to return for the refugees. And just one more thing I want to throw in is I think this is the best way to kind of to get an answer for this was so we have the British Mandate for Palestine, and then we have the UN Petition for Palestine. So we have Palestine defined under the UN under those two documents that created Israel. So then it's supposed to be an Arab state in those documents. It defines it as an Arab state that shouldn't be unimpinged. It's the Arab homeland in these documents. So if they don't have a state and they're under military control, whose land is that? Who is that? If they live under another government, but they're supposed to have their own state, what government do they live under? So I'll go ahead and pass it to you.
Okay, so on the racial discrimination, there is no racial discrimination here. You're talking because Palestinians that are citizens of Israel have full rights. In my last debate, I gave some examples of that, where you have the Palestinian judge sentencing a former head of Israel, president, or what's the term they use? But sentenced into, I think it was 7 years, prime minister, sentenced into like 7 years or so many years of prison. So it's not a racial thing; it's a citizen and non-citizen thing, and I just point out that that's no different than any other country in the whole world. The differences between citizens and non-citizens, even within a country, are vastly worse in all other Arab nations. So I don't know why. Well, maybe I could have an idea, but I just don't see why Israel is so heavily singled out on these issues. As to, so that's the citizens within the border. From what I understand, there are 4 different types. There are full citizens, there are people that could be citizens, and a variety of 2 other kinds of Palestinians in the area. And Jerusalem, I believe is still under international control, is not part of Israel's actual country's territory yet, as far as I can remember, correct?
No, it's occupied by the IDF.
So Israel is traditionally, if you go back thousands of years, Jerusalem is part of Israel. So they claim that as part of their traditional homeland. So if we're going to get into traditional homeland, then I think Israel has full claim to that, and they have a claim to Israel as well. But to the other parts, to the Palestinian territories, and the right of return, I don't see why. What is your argument for their right of return? Why would they have a right of return? No other nation allows that either. You can talk about giving compensation for homes lost. Nobody requires that either. We're talking about something that happened under a war. If you want to talk about specifically the West Bank, it was 1967 war, which, though I believe that was the preemptive war, was still a defensive war. So Israel has been in several defensive wars in which they've claimed territory, and they've given much of the territory back for really just because of international pressure. But they had no reason that they should be required to give it back. When you're attacked and you take over territory from your attacker, I think you have every right to keep that territory. So I don't see reasoning for that they should have any right of return necessarily. What was your issue on the Palestinian territories again?
Well, they live under military occupations. It's different in both territories because the West Bank is being colonized. So Israel goes into the West Bank and then they build a Jewish-only city. So you have to be Jewish to live there. They put a wall up around it and they force everyone away at gunpoint and tear their house down and all this stuff. So they take away that private property. But it doesn't even matter, though, if you live in the Palestinian territory, you live under military occupation. So you're not a citizen of Israel are anywhere, really, you have no rights. They control your entire life. They control everything. And in Gaza, it's different. They still control everything, but they just have a barrier around the entire thing. So they control how many calories the people eat a day. And they did retreat from Gaza, but they actually have 90% of the land, which isn't the way the land was defined in 48 under the partition plan that gave them the right. They weren't supposed to take any more land, and then they won. But the big difference was when they won the war in 1967. So then that's when they were able to take the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem and do the military occupations.
How does that make them apartheid, though?
Because the people live under military occupation. That's illegal under the Geneva Convention. And the same thing is, and the other thing that's illegal is that these refugees are supposed to have a right to return because they were forced away in the war. They have a right to return there. That's the law.
Well, again, it's war. So wars happen all the time. Countries engage in war, and the UN. I don't really think the UN has any right to tell countries what to do. But there was no country there that the UN took away and gave to the Israel. So I don't think that applies. But I still don't see why this is apartheid.
Well, I'll do segregation.
And okay. I mean, whatever you think of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which Israel is still at war. I mean, basically, they're still at war against Hamas and the terrorist organizations that base themselves in those territories. And so they control them and they're actually quite lax, I think, in the way they control them. They could be brutal if they wanted to. And I think they would have every right to be brutal against the terrorist individuals that are in that area. So,
okay. Do you want me to go ahead and do a full thing now?
Yeah. So I just want to know why they're apartheid, because I think apartheid is more, it's a racial segregation. The term apartheid specifically speaks to a racial segregation of citizens. So it was South Africa.
A lot of things. I'd really like to go ahead and interject and answer your questions for you. The first thing is I actually have a question for you. Do you think that there would be an Israel without the UN? Do you think that the land would have been divided and they'd have the authority to do this otherwise?
I think there would be an Israel. I mean, Israel is not a brand new creation on the face of the earth. Israel was there thousands of years ago, and it came and went, and that it came back a couple thousand years later is what they call. Now, I'm a Christian, so I think biblically I would say yes, it would be there, whether the UN was there or not. I know I've listened to J. Vernon McGee speak about how it wasn't really the UN, but that's more of a non-legal issue. Okay. So,
well, if you had answered refute some of your other points. Your first point was racial discrimination within the proper zone of the proper borders. The thing is, there's a lot of examples. There's a segregated school system would be one. They don't have the same rights to marriage, so they can't. If they marry an Arab person, they actually have to go to the Palestinian territory. Would be another example of that. But the big thing is that even though, because like usually what they'll say is, and I know that you brought this up before, that maybe an Arab gets elected, like they can be elected and they vote, which is usually a point that someone makes because it's a little bit different than say South Africa because they have some more rights. But the thing is that it's defined as a Jewish state. It's a Jewish state, and what does a Jewish state mean? And this is in their Declaration of Independence. It means that the majority of the people who live there have to be that ethnicity, so they have to be Jewish. So even if these people are, and the other thing is that, so even this guy's elected, even our woman or whoever, even if they're elected, they can't question that. It's in Article 7A of the law that created the Knesset in 1958. They cannot question that it's a Jewish state. It has to be a Jewish state. So there has to be a majority, and this isn't in the Knesset itself. This is in their legislative area. It has to be a Jewish majority. and they can't stop that. They have no way of to fight to stop it from being a Jewish state. So they can't fight their oppressors that way. And there's other examples like in the legal system. Well, you made a lot of points, so I think you really should let me go ahead and talk about all of them.
Okay, can I just say one quick thing about that? Okay. So what? I just don't think it matters. They're a state, and if they want to be a Jewish state, that's where they were founded to be. Then that's part of who they are. Then I don't see what the big deal there is. They're not persecuting Palestinian citizens. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, actually, that's what I was about to. One of the things I was about to get into is that this is really the tricky thing here, and it's probably going to be the hardest thing for a lot of people to accept, I think, because it's the hardest thing to say, but it's the reality. Jewishness is an ethnicity. It's not a nationality. It's an ethnicity. It's multicultural. There's people who are Jewish throughout the world. I'm Jewish, for example, but I'm obviously American at the same time, just like I'm Italian at the same time. So there's people throughout the world who are Jewish, and it's not a nationality. I mean, you can call it a religion, and really, I mean, how you define what a race is, that's a whole other conversation. But Jewishness is an ethnicity, basically. That's multicultural. It's not a nationality. And the other thing is, I wish that you can look this up. There's all the Bibles, atlases, maps. It's not Israel on the map. It's Palestine, and it is in the Bible. I looked this up today just to be sure. King David, that's Hebron. That's the city of Hebron in the West Bank in the Bible, and it mentions Palestine. It calls it Palestine in the Bible. And I'm not religious, so I mean that means absolutely nothing to me. That's not the Bible. The Bible means nothing to me at all. I mean, I respect people's religion and stuff.
I've never actually seen Palestine in the Bible anywhere. It's Philistine. The Philistines were in the Bible.
Same thing.
That's where they believe Palestine is derived from. But that's.
Well, I'll show you a Bible from the 1850s that says, that says Palestine on the front of it.
Well, I know Philistine. The Philistines lived in that area. But if you want to go back to when the Israelites and there's argument whether that Israel is a state. It's not like the Israelites of biblical times exactly, that they were a nation led directly by God and all that. But they went into a land that was Canaan and the Canaanites and had lots of different people in there, and they took over. But it doesn't define a nationality. The nationality is the Arab citizens who live there. Well, there are Jewish citizens there too, but really, I understand the idea that the Jews are a people, right? It's like a group of people. They're very proud. They're separate from other. They're the smallest. I think the smallest cultural, ethnic group in the world, possibly one of them, anyways. And yeah, they are a people. Judaism is a religion, and to be a Jew, you are defined as having a Jewish mother, right? And you can also convert. Ivana Trump converted, but yeah, I understand that they're kind of two separate issues. You can be a Jew and you can follow the Judaic religion. So they are the same word, but not always the same person. Now, again, Israel being a Jewish state defined by a people who are Jewish or Hebrew, as many people might say. So I don't see what the problem there is. They want to be that way, then that's fine. That's their right as a state.
But it just doesn't mean anything to me because I'm not religious. I don't see that as an historical document. And I think it's, like I said, it's kind of pointless anyway, because it's not a nationality, it's an ethnicity. It's multicultural.
Okay, but I'm still not seeing, what's the problem there though?
It's multicultural. It's an ethnicity. It's not a nationality. It's an ethnicity that's multicultural. Anyone can
There's
be. Anyone can
yeah,
be. There's
I know there's Jews in New York that are not Israeli. I mean, there's more Jews in New York than there are in
They
Israel,
live in
right?
Iran. There's plenty of Jews. There's plenty of them. I mean, they live
Yeah, they're
everywhere.
everywhere. There's huge acid groups in the Soviet Union. I lived with one, so I rented a room from a guy that was from the former Soviet Union. He's a traditional Jewish man, old man, but
Well,
that's just the way they set up their state, though. That Israel was set up to be a homeland for persecuted Jewish individuals, right?
yeah. The thing is, though, it was split into two states, and they've broken the borders ever since, and they weren't ever supposed to do that. And so
Well, they were
whose
attacked.
land is this? Whose land is this then? Is it their land?
They had an indefensible border, and they were attacked in 1948. As soon as they were recognized by the UN, they were immediately attacked by their neighbors. And
From the river to the sea, it should be Israel, right?
well, if you want to go back to the Old Testament, I mean, Abraham stood on the Temple Mount, I believe it was. Well, that's where he sacrificed, or he was going to sacrifice his son. The two sides claim it was their own. Was it Ishmael or Israel? But anyways, so that's the argument. That's where the argument comes from, though. I mean, that's really where the divide between Judaism and Islam is centered on, is whose son did Abraham sacrifice, and who was promised that land. So that gets into the religious aspect. But I mean, again, if you're getting into biblical terms, then you're talking about the entire. You're going way past into Egypt, way off to the east. Off the top of my head, I don't recall the borders, but they're vastly greater than where Israel is right now. Is what they consider the promised land. They're not going out and conquering. In fact, I would seriously doubt that the Israeli government has any plans on conquering because I don't think they're very religious, anyways.
That's another debate we could have. I mean, I don't. If I start talking about it, now, I'll go off topic.
That's just a little belief, though. But that's kind of their traditional beliefs, and that's the Judeo-Christian belief is that Israel was promised. But I mean, that's not really to this topic. I'm just that was one of the questions that was raised.
Well, sure. No, the history. I think the history is important to the topic. I mean, we're talking about the legality, though. I think there are Christians who this is important to them, and then I understand that. But I really think that that this is wrong, and people are catching on to it because it is Israel. Let's face it, it's not supposed to be, but it is Israel from the river to the sea. It's not Palestine. Never going to be Palestine. They control the whole thing, and they control those zones. So why don't the people who live in the Palestinian zones have rights? Jimmy Carter would say that he's not even debating. Like, he uses the term apartheid. He would say, I'm not even debating the Israel proper zone, even though there is a system of segregation that's a lot like the Jim Crow South. He'd say, I'll forget that. I'm not even debating that. I'm just talking about the Palestinian territories. They live under military occupation. They need to get it together and have some sort of plan where they have their own state, or just call it Israel and give them rights. So if these people, why should these people live under military occupation and not have rights?
Well, Israel can't bring in everybody into Israel, right? You just say everybody that wants to come into Israel can be a citizen. Even everybody in the West Bank, all the Palestinians, they are a Jewish state. They would no longer be a Jewish state, and they would probably become eventually more like their neighbors, and that's what they have to avoid, right? They're surrounded by Islamic countries, and they are.
It's the thing. That would be why that's why a lot of people believe that they haven't just annexed those territories officially, is because they wouldn't have a Jewish majority anymore. But they definitely have. They have 90% of the land now.
Well, if they went back to their 1967 borders, which is what the UN and a lot of countries around the world are pushing, it's an indefensible border, right? I mean, you drew the map, but if you go to an actual map, it's much more clear that the West Bank looks like it's about a quarter of their whole territory. And if they give up the West Bank back, forget that part, then they're just like they're basically nothing. You can't defend
Shouldn't
that
those
land.
people have rights then? Like, why should they have to live under a military occupation though?
Well, they have rights, but they don't have to be Israeli citizens.
Gotta be citizens of somewhere. They don't have their own government.
Well, I would point out that the real problem that goes on in the Palestinian territories is the Palestinian government.
Well, they don't really have a unified government, because split into two
Well,
territories.
they pretty much do. I mean, well, okay, two territories, but still, they're controlled by
There's
what
more
is
to
it,
it than that.
PLO?
They live under military occupation. I mean, how much power do you think those people really have?
Well, they have a little sort of government. The government seems to have quite a bit of power.
Not really. I mean, they'll break down. They can go to a military prison and be held as a political prisoner overnight. They do it with the kids who throw stones and stuff like that.
Arafat, the real problem that the Palestinians face is their own government. Now, that's typical, with many governments around the world. What is the problems that people face is their own government. But Palestine is a very...
What? He's the greatest leader they ever had. Arafat was the greatest leader they ever had, and he
stole like $4 billion from them. He had about $4 billion sitting in bank accounts in Europe.
It's the government.
That's Arafat. I mean, as a great leader, he kept them in poverty. That's the problem. The PLO, the reason that the people are in poverty is their government keeps them there so they can use them as political pawns.
Well, that's government. That's another debate. I think the people should have rights. I think that they should just all have the same rights, because the people who live under these military occupations, if they do something wrong, they actually go to a military prison, and it's military law. But if someone who lives in one of these colonies that they're not supposed to, this is also against international law. These colonies that they build, that they use U.S. taxpayer money for, that you can only Jewish live in, they would just go to a regular court like you and I do, and say that, like, and so a Palestinian, and this would be another example, a Palestinian throws a stone at a tank. If they don't get killed for it, they're gonna bust down his door. He's like this is like a 10-year-old kid. They're gonna bust down his door and take him to a war prison. Where he has no right. It's under the law of war. But if then they're like some Jewish settlers, if they attack a Palestinian, like they burn this baby to death. I don't know if you heard about this. They burned this house down, this baby to death. That would be murder here, right? If I did that, I'd be in prison for the rest of my life. This guy went to jail for 4 months for that. So that would be...
Injustices happen around the world, though, right? I mean, you had the famous example of the young 17-year-old. What did they call that? Apathy. He suffered from it's too much wealth was his upbringing, where he never learned right and wrong, and he killed 4 to 6 people driving drunk, and he got 6 months probation. So there are massive examples of horrible crimes that people commit and are not punished by the legal system. So yes, I'm not going to...
I hear the social justice argument a lot, but it's not really so much like people think about this as a social justice thing and all that, but it's not really, because do you believe in private property? You believe in private property, right?
Yeah, of course.
Private
yeah.
Well, they're it's private property and it's being taken away. Is that who?
Yeah, so I think that's a different issue, right? So they should be compensated for any private property that's stolen. So I would say yes, but I don't think Israel is anything like the apartheid South African government, because again, the apartheid South African government was South Africa, 1948, all white government immediately began forcing the existing policies of racial segregation under a system of legislation that it called apartheid. So you can look at Jim Crow South. These are government imposed laws of segregation, and you don't see that in Israel. You see everybody walking around.
That the Knesset, that they have no power, that it has to have a Jewish majority, and the Knesset has no power to change that. And so even if this Arab person gets elected, they have no power to change the fact that it's a Jewish majority and that they segregated. They can't question that they have different schools. They can't question the the legal system. They can't question.
Are you talking about
Division of the resources? I mean, this is a desert, so we're like this is the amount of water that's distributed to these people and all this sort of thing. Sorry.
What are you talking about, in the West Bank or in the Israel proper?
In the proper zone. Yeah, the proper zone is still segregated. That's why I say it's the Jim Crow South, really. I mean, like they tell you that these people live hand in hand and all this stuff. I mean, maybe some of them do. I'm sure that I know there's areas where they do, but let's face it, the majority of them don't.
Well, I would again say that no, they all live together. They all have the same rights. All the Israeli citizens, Arabs in Israel, receive the same treatment in hospitals. They had 180,000 Palestinians treated in Israeli hospitals in the last.
Well, it's about the only thing is healthcare, and it's because they have a fully socialized healthcare system. Even though they're the largest recipient of U.S. aid, it's about $20 million a day.
They get about $3 to $4 billion of U.S. Now, I would argue that all aid should be shut off, but the Palestinians get about $1.2 billion of U.S. aid. Palestinians get about $2.2 billion of international aid every year. Where does that money go? I mean, again, I go to the point that the problem the Palestinians have is that their government steals everything that they have. It's like Haiti.
Well, I think it's like every government, but the thing is, if they have no power, I mean, sure, cut all the aid, but they how are they going to build an economy? How are they can't do that? I mean,
well, that's again,
there's a wall around the whole thing. And
they're allowed to go in and out, but they are. So Israel's under threat, and so they do have border checks, and where the places that they have received the greatest amount of terrorism, that they go in there and they do try to control that. I would say that if they really wanted to crack down, for instance, under Bush, they had the war with Hamas, right? And they were George Bush forced them not to go in. And so I think they were really hamstrung in that one. They could have done a lot more, right?
Actually, they went in 2000. Well, if you're talking about 2006, it was because of George Bush's peace plan, and they followed the plan.
And they stopped. But I mean,
that's actually part of the apartheid argument, because basically, even though they gave up this very small, the Gaza Strip used to be part of Egypt, they gave up this little small strip of land that used to be part of Egypt. Basically, it's about the size of 2 counties here in Ohio. They're very densely populated. Even though they gave it up, it's basically kind of like an Indian reservation. They did this in South Africa, actually, where they would force the minority group into basically like a camp. So that would be one comparison to South Africa. And then, of course, like I already said, it is institutionalized through the Knesset. But yeah, that's the example there.
They're saying that they can't change things, but I don't. Well, that's fine. You can't change things. You can't change the Israeli constitution. They are meant to be a Jewish state, and I think that's fine. If they want to be that way, that's fine. But again, I would say there is no actual segregation. I mean, everybody in Israel has full rights. They don't go to separate schools. The people in the Palestinian territories go to schools controlled by their own sort of government. But
well, I mean, I'm not going to defend segregation of schools, especially if we're going to call us a democracy.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't see, not that I'm aware of any actual segregation in Israel to the citizens. In fact, what is it? Inciting racism is a criminal offense. Same treatment in hospitals. You look at non-whites in South Africa, it's separate amenities. You look at Jim Crow South, separate water fountains. None of that is true in Israel. It's not like Arabs are not allowed to sit at the lunch counter or something. They have their own political parties in the Knesset.
Sorry?
Oh, you even mentioned they had their own political parties in the Knesset, and they received 13 seats in the 2015 Israel election.
Even to be elected, the district has to have a majority of Jewish citizens, and they can't change that. So it has to be a Jewish majority where they live in their district. There has to be a majority of Jewish people who live there.
Okay, but they still have a right to vote, right?
Sure, they have a right to vote, but they can't change that. They can't change that. They can't change any of these segregation policies. Any of these segregation policies that I've illustrated.
Israel's policy is to stay a Jewish state, right? And if they allow Palestinians, all of them, to vote, then they would lose their entire reason of being, which is to be a Jewish state. So now they do let all the Palestinian citizens vote. But if they were just to bring anybody that wants to be Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, but if they wanted any Palestinian that wanted to be an Israeli citizen in all of its territories to come in, be Israeli citizens and vote, then they would lose that aspect of their nation, right? And so if they're protecting that, then I don't see the harm there. I don't see what the problem is.
You don't think that's apartheid, do you?
No, I don't. That's not apartheid. They're not citizens of Israel, and they're not in Israel proper, or the state of Israel.
Controls their entire life, though. They live under a military occupation that's illegal. They have.
I don't.
And also, after the 48 war, for 20 years, the citizens are supposedly have equal rights inside Israel. They live under martial law.
That's because they're basically at war, right? So if Palestine wanted to get out of living under this so-called martial law, then they could do something about it themselves.
You say they're at war, but the thing is that the Palestinians don't have a military.
Well, they don't have a military, but they do have a little guerrilla type military, right? They have guerrilla fighters that live in those areas, and they protect them. Many of them protect them. Now, look, they're Palestinian Christians, so I'm not saying Palestinians are evil people or anything, but I'm not saying that at all. But there are a lot of terrorists that live in those areas. Hamas bases itself in that area, right?
Yeah. Hamas controls the Gaza,
and they're
inside of it, not outside. Yeah, so they control what comes in and what comes out of it, but they control the people. It's basically a prison. It's kind of like how maybe the guards don't control anything that goes on in the prison, right? It's just the same thing.
Okay, so do we say that? Do you want to compare it to a prison? Maybe. Do we say the prisoners all should be given full equal rights to the guards? I mean, it's not. I'm not saying that they're prisoners or anything, but I'm still getting to the point that you have very terrible people. You have terrorists in these areas, and they're being often protected by the people living in those areas. And they are not officially at war, but they are sort of at war. You have a lot of, we might say, guerrilla fighters. And so that's why they have the fence, and they have border checks, because they have to make sure that people crossing into Israel, the state of Israel, are not carrying weapons with them. We have border checks in the United States, although most people ignore them, but coming into the U.S. ignore them. That's why we need this big, beautiful wall, don't you see?
Why is there Hamas?
Well, there's a lot of hate for Israel in that whole region. I mean, I don't think any of the states in that they've had since 1979 they had a lasting peace with Egypt, and I think they're fairly peaceful with Jordan. But a lot of the other countries in the area they've had wars with them. And so
they had wars with everybody, and it was Jimmy Carter who wrote the book "Peace Not Apartheid." And I think there's one online. He actually negotiated that deal with Egypt.
Yeah, I think he got a peace prize for it.
Sorry,
Egypt Accords.
Yeah, he actually did that. And he thinks it's
Camp David Accord. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. What was your point? The thing is, what type? Oh, okay, this is what I was gonna say. Hamas got started around the same time that that Arafat dropped the peace deal, and that didn't go through. So he was almost successful creating this peace deal, even though it wasn't the greatest deal. But he was gonna. He of course he walked away from that. But he was going to try to negotiate for a new one. So the thing is that the talks as far as a solution to this, because there is no solution, that there was actually going to be a solution here, and then that's when Hamas came about all of a sudden.
Well, yeah, you bring up a great point, because Arafat walked away from that, and Clinton said that he realized that there is no solution that included an Israeli state. I mean, there's the land for peace thing has never brought peace. They've given up quite a bit of land, but they've never gotten peace.
They have 90% of the land, and they want more.
Well, they want a defensible territory. I don't think they want more.
Years. They want more. Sorry?
No, I don't think there's any reason to believe they want more. I mean, where they are right now, they want the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and maybe the Golan Heights. I'm looking as well.
I'd love to debate you on that another time.
Okay, so let me. But you did bring up Clinton, and yeah, Clinton said that he realized that Arafat had no goal of peace. Arafat just wanted to get rid of Israel.
Okay, well, that's another conversation. But basically, just to address Hamas, they came about when it actually looked good. They came about, and of course, I don't support Hamas. And the thing about what Clinton did is the same thing. Jimmy Carter actually with Oslo Accords, where his peace deal was the greatest one, and they've all had one. Like George W. Bush had one even, but Clinton. The thing is that supposedly he was going to negotiate this great deal. It wasn't. They still dominated everything. All the resources, the media, which they dominate. There's no free press in Gaza or the West Bank. I don't know if you know that. If you do that, that's one of the reasons why this is becoming a popular issue now, is because there's no way for it to be reported fairly. I mean, I didn't even know about this until 5 years ago. We have less than 4 minutes left, so I would like to go ahead and make my final statement, and then you can make yours to close.
Okay.
The state of Israel meets the definition of apartheid under the Geneva Conventions and international law under the United Nations. Palestinians are split into different zones where they have different rights. Some will then recognize borders of Israel under conditions of segregation and be a minority, while others live under military occupation. Many will never return. There is no doubt that the regime's crimes are apartheid. The United States should end all funding for Israel. Citizens abroad should boycott and invest, and the United Nations should take full action under international law.
All right, so I'd say using the definition of apartheid as, again, under apartheid, non-white South Africans, a majority of the population were forced to live in separate areas and separate facilities. So this was it was specifically a racial segregation. And in Israel, you see that citizens of Israel have full rights. They are not forced to exist and live with separate amenities. They have the same treatment in hospitals and the same hospitals. Incitement to racism is a criminal offense in Israel, which I don't think it should be. But in 1950, they had the Bantu Act, separated blacks from whites in South African educational system. We don't see that in Israel. Everybody's given equal opportunity in the workforce and educational department. There are Palestinians and Arabs in Israel universities who both study and teach as professors, so very anti-apartheid. An Arab judge, again, I've mentioned this several times, but he sentenced an ex-Israeli president, Moshe Katsav, to prison for 7 years. That's not an act of apartheid. Everybody living in Israel has full rights. I think the main issue that's brought up is the area of the West Bank and Gaza. Now, we could see what would happen if Israel was allowed to take them in as Israel proper, but as of right now, these are areas where Israel has a lot of enemies living, protected by those areas. And the people in those areas' biggest enemy is their own government, who steals their resources and the $2.2 billion of aid that they receive, not Israel. So I don't think the word apartheid applies to the Israel government at all, because there's no racial segregation within Israel. Yeah. So I just said I don't think that the apartheid is a good applicable word to this situation.
Okay. Well, I told you that there are refugees forced to live, that have a right to return, who are forced to live in Gaza. So that would be one comparison.
Well,
South Africa.
But that's not apartheid. I mean, refugees, I don't think any of them have a right of return. Israel, as a state, as the way that they are, have a right to define the rules for their own system.
All right. Well, thanks for debating me again.
Okay.
I really appreciate it.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll get to debate on that. Ivory should be legalized.
Sure. Yeah. Just let me know when you want to do it.
So that's more of a favorite area of mine, but this is yours from one of your favorite areas. So